Hi, everyone, and welcome to my personal info and 3 levels of government control of public education video. I'm going to start off talking about my educational journey. I graduated in 2016 with my bachelor's in elementary education with an emphasis in mathematics. After graduating, I moved to Las Vegas, Nevada, where I began teaching for the Clark County School District in Las Vegas. While I was there, I taught fifth grade for 2 years, and then I taught a double accelerated middle school math course for 2 years. As a result of COVID, I decided to move back to Kansas to be closer to family. And in return, I was able to start teaching in Derby, Kansas for the Derby Public School District as a third grade teacher. The school that I'm at, it's called Tanglewood Elementary, and our school demographics, we have 454 students, and about 27% of those students receive free and reduced lunch. Next slide, I'm going to talk about my interests and hobbies. One of the most important things to me is my family. Like I said, I moved back to Kansas just to be closer with them. Below, this is a picture of my two bulldogs. This is Otis and Gus. These are my baby boys. Another thing that I love to do is travel. This is my partner and I when we were in Las Vegas with our bulldogs on Mount Charleston. Below is a picture of my students. I love being a teacher. I don't think I could see myself doing anything else. I love education. Up here is a picture of learning because I love to learn. I believe that's something that I just value, being a learner. Below this is a picture of my teammates. These two people I've become really close with since moving back to Kansas. I'm also just a believer in being happy and smiling. I love traveling, and another fun little thing that I love to do is I love to cook. Next, I'm going to talk about the 3 levels of government control of public education, which are the 3 levels are the federal, state, and local. So, the first question that we were asked to research was what kind of supports do public schools receive at the following levels? So, starting at the local level, all 3 levels provide funding. The local funding comes from property taxes, the local property taxes, and um, through the research, I found that a little under half of the school's funding comes from the local level. They also create policies. They provide supports by hiring personnel, establishing the curriculum, and then they also decide whether or not schools should be closed, consolidated, or constructed. At the state level, they do provide state level funding as well. They provide slightly less than half of the school's operating cost. Um, and this money comes from income taxes, sales taxes, and other fees. They also support by overseeing the schools. They ask the question, are schools meeting benchmarks for student achievement? And they also provide support through programs, services, and policies such as school nutrition, school wellness, and title services. The federal government, because of the 10th Amendment, most education policy is decided at the state and local levels. So the federal role in education provides support by filling in gaps that state and local governments can't when critical national needs arise. One of the resources talked a lot about like the history of the federal government and their involvement with support, and I thought that was interesting. So federal funding, they talked about the grants for specific services such as Title I programs and IDEA. They also provide support by regulations and rule making, such as civil rights, FERPA, Every Student Succeeds Act, and the EEOC. Who is in charge of these various levels regarding education? This took me back to like high school government, and that was a struggle for me. So I learned a lot in with this question about who is in charge and all the different levels. I don't know if anybody else can relate on that. So at the local level, I felt pretty confident with understanding who is in charge and who is involved in the decision making. So for the Derby Public Schools, we are a seven-member board. We have a seven-member board of education, and they are all volunteer their time. They are elected at large, and they serve for 4 years. What are their duties and responsibilities? They establish the policies for the district. They review and see if there's any changes that need to be made. They set the short and long term goals for our schools. They select and evaluate the superintendent of the schools. They hold the superintendent accountable for accomplishing their goals. And then they also work closely with the administrators, school staff, and community to set district goals. I felt confident at the state level still. The Kansas State Legislature, the Kansas Board of Educationer, and the Commissioner of Educationer, those are the people who are in charge in in that at the state level. So the state legislators, they are paid, and the House of Representative and senators, there are 10 elected members who serve 4 year terms, each representing a district, and they volunteer. This is the Board of Education. A fun little fact, the current chair, Jim Porter, from District 9, he is a resident of my hometown. He actually was the high school principal whenever I was in school. So I do have a little connection in the Board of Education with him. And then the Commissioner of Education, Dr. Randy Watson, and he is paid. So what are the responsibilities? So the Kansas legislator, they provide a state board of education that has the general supervision of public schools. Then the State Board of Education, they appoint a commissioner of education, and their mission is to provide support to help prepare Kansas students for lifelong success through rigorous quality academic instruction, career training, and character development according to each student's gifts and talents. This is where it got a little rocky. The federal government. The federal government is made up of I'm sorry, the people who are in charge of the federal government level for education, the federal legislator, the U.S. Department of Education, and the Secretary of Education. So at the federal legislative branch, they are paid, and that is part of the U.S. Department of Education. At the executive branch, we have the Secretary of Education, who is Betsy DeVos. And then what are their duties and responsibilities? They establish policy, administer and coordinate most federal assistance programs, assist the president in executing education policies for the nation, and implementing laws enacted by Congress. And which level has the most power and control over public education? I believe the state has the largest control over public education. I believe this because they have the power to decide which programs they want to adopt from the federal government. They create the benchmarks for school districts, and they create laws and policies that govern the state's education system. As mentioned previously, the 10th Amendment, it restricts much of the control from the federal government. So, which of the three levels of government have the most influence over these NS number six components? So, CL 6.1, I believe, is the local level. When I read some of these components, many of those components seem just like the day to day necessities of a school. It's the systems that keep the school running. So, much of those systems I feel to believe are decided by the local Board of Education members. 6.2, um, I believe this to be the state and local level, less of the local, more of the state, but both entities I think have a stake in the success of their schools. So both of them are kind of working together collaboratively to determine the best plan of action for student success. So, like, reviewing that data, collecting that data. Um, States have more influence on that. However, the local level still is a part of it. 6.3, I believe to be the federal and state level, less of the state, more of the federal. Actually, that one's kind of equal with me. I don't, it's kind of just depending on the situation or the circumstances. So, policies and regulations from the state are communicated across the district and then voted in on by the local Board of Education members. Kind of like with the federal laws and regulations, those are communicated onto the state and then state to the local. And how does all this support the educational success and well being of each student and adult? All three levels of government work collaboratively for the success of all students. Each plays a pivotal role in providing funding for resources for students. Several of the leaders involved are not paid for their work they do, but dedicate countless hours to the decision making that impacts students. There are checks and balances in place so all three levels can hold each other accountable for their actions and decisions. I'll let you pause this here. This is my reflection, correlation, and relevant component. And these are the resources from the articles as well as our KDE website and our local school website.